Hey, Antonio.
Are you in LA as well?
No, I'm in upstate New York.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, so it's very scenic and pretty, but I'm moving at the end of this week to Ohio, so
Oh,
uh,
okay.
how that goes.
Okay.
Um, I love the show so much. I think it's so beautiful. It's really emotional and very painful to watch, and I
Mm,
think your music really supports her Estee's emotional journey.
mhm.
I just think it's really really lovely. I know that in the Jewish faith, and especially in the show Unorthodox, there is a lot of music, just like in the plot. Can you tell me how you wanted to not just like honor the music of that faith, but how did you want to like support that through the score?
Sure. We had a lot of discussions about this right from early on. In fact, it was one of the primary, even before I came on board as composer, it was one of they had a kind of Bible already written of what they thought the score should be and how
Mhm.
it should work. And one of the main concerns was that it shouldn't be. We should never try to sort of simulate Jewish music,
Mhm.
or for that matter, simulate classical music, which is another core sort of musical direction that's already in the story, or the electronic Berlin nightclub sort of scene.
Yeah.
That wasn't something that they wanted. What we really nailed it down to being a question of making a score that was 100% about the characters and informing the emotional trajectory of everybody. But it only, in terms of aesthetics, it just had to feel like it belonged in the
Right.
world of that other music, not that it was trying to be the other music. So, of course, that meant that I brought some electronic sounds
Mhm.
into it. Like the opening titles is a good example
Yeah.
of something that we really talked about because I didn't want to set any kind of pre. I mean, when you read about what the show is about, or if you tell somebody, oh, it's in Yiddish, it's about a girl who is scared. I mean, that instantly is going to tick boxes for some people and not for others. But the
Yeah.
open titles doesn't set you up for some kind of you know uh, preconceived idea of like a religious themed
Yeah.
story. It's more modern, it's more contemporary, and they wanted to have uh, an aspect of like the electronic modern world that she goes to in that music, and also a sense of escape and tension in it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like because I feel like sometimes I was listening because I was listening for that sort of cues from that musicality, and I was just like, oh, it's not trying to emulate something, and it feels
Right,
like the music was really coming from um, sort of like the emotional weight of things and the action.
absolutely. Yeah.
It feels like it was really it really is it's enhancing the action and the emotion of it. So I was really really surprised and actually really kind of impressed that it wasn't
Mm,
trying to like mimic something or emulate something.
right.
Um, you mentioned the theme for a second, and the sort of the electronic influences of that.
Mm,
Really love. I mean, it's this short, really cool set of music. Can you explain a little more about what your inspirations were for the theme music?
sure. Actually, funny story. That um, theme music is almost exactly the same as one of the first demos I did for the
Oh,
show. Because when they put out the pitch to a bunch of composers to sort of see what people thought,
yeah.
they asked for, they sent us some example pages of the script.
Okay.
Not the whole script, obviously. We had, signed an NDA and the whole thing. So we had a few scenes. One of them was the scene, the really amazing scene where she walks into the lake fully dressed.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
That was one scene, but we had to just imagine that from paper, from on
Yeah.
paper. And so there were three scenes, plus they talked about the opening titles and the things I said before about wanting it to be ultimately not what you would expect for like a kind of, not to give people the expectation of it being a very niche drama about,
Yeah.
in a kind of period film kind of way. And so they said, do something for these three scenes. We'd love to hear like a theme for ST, for example, and
Okay.
also if you want to have us do something for an opening titles. And so I that's what I did. And what I was thinking, I mean, in that music, the opening titles, there's a couple of interesting things. One thing is Este's theme is actually in it, which you might not notice when you hear it, but the same melody that plays when you see her, for example, in the taxi arriving in Berlin, and you see her face reacting to this city that has so much history of fear for her, but also it's this unknown step she's taken away from her community. So that tune, that melody is there. It's also when she walks into the water, that melody comes in again, and it's in the opening titles. It's sort of hidden. Well, it's not even hidden. It's really in there. It builds up to that, but it's sort of, you don't recognize it immediately because it's in a very different context.
Yeah.
And the other thing about their opening titles was that once that was really established, and I think once they liked the demos that I'd done, I went to Berlin to have a meeting with them, and we were talking about the musical direction for the show. Everyone was like, yeah, that's great titles music. We do that. And so in a way, it kind of became, because the whole opening part of the first episode is one long, I think they call it, what do they call it? There's a word in TV language, teaser or something. You know, the first time you see a show, the entire first part of a show that you see before the first time you ever see it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know, and that's quite an important thing in TV, and especially in streaming, because a show, obviously it's important in any kind of, you know, in theater, everything, the first 10 minutes, you have to establish a lot of things.
Yeah.
But in the context of TV and streaming, where people can just quickly decide, I don't care about this, I'm going to switch to something else. It's a crucial kind of thing. And in our story, it's so important as well, because we're trying to set up this dramatic escape, and put into place all of these sort of factors that led to it without giving too much away. So we're not really quite sure where she's coming from or why. But because we had that music as a target that was always going to be the opening credits, it meant that the whole first scene I wrote is like a long intro to that. So it all builds up. It's all, you know, I work backwards in a way, knowing that was the destination.
Okay. Yeah,
So
that's,
I mean,
yeah. Like I actually, a lot of times when I was watching the opening, I felt like even when we get to the opening credits and the opening theme, it feels like maybe after the buildup of the, I guess like the prologue of every episode, it does a little bit of like a release after like the first time we may see it, because it's like, all right,
there's a preamble, and it's like a trailer coming in and just kind of sets you up for the next episode.
If I could talk about a couple of very specific musical cues. You touched on the moment where she, you know, gets into the lake, which is a very emotional thing. A couple of other ones that really struck me was in the flashback scene when she's in the supermarket. I think the track is called Supermarket Debutante, which is a great title for that as well. There's this like ominous undertone that feeds into it. I guess it sort of alerts the audience to like the danger or something kind of, I don't want to say creepy, but like the sort of you know, weird circumstances that she's just like walking around the supermarket and they're just like looking at her. Can you talk to me about that little piece of music?
Sure. So that's a theme, that particular part you're talking about, we used in quite a few different places. It starts off with like a kind of repeating notes and a kind of, and it's really about tension and about the heaviness of the situation. And we found that it really worked in quite a few different contexts. For example, that had a very similar intro in the piece, I think it's in the first episode as well, where she is alone at night in the music school for the first time when everyone's left, and she goes to the piano, and it's cut with a lot of flashbacks telling the story of, you know, the arguments she had with her parent. Anyway, and in that context, you get that sort of, it brings that sort of, I think it's a sense of an overbearing pressure she's felt her whole life. That's what's in That's what it's for. And so in that scene, I mean, it's such a weird thing. You imagine you go to a supermarket and again, I don't have any experience of this. I don't belong to any kind of small community like that, but I can imagine it must be weird to go to like one of your communities, you know, kosher supermarkets or whatever in the neighborhood, and there's this whole ritual that apparently this is a real thing. Like they do that kind of thing. You do get presented
and it's
to mother-in-law, potential mother-in-laws, you know, in that kind of way.
And it sort of it reminded me of like just throughout the whole show, like I had to sort of remind myself when we get into scenes like that, especially when we're inside, like I have to remember that this isn't a show that is taking place like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. This is
really good point. We used to laugh. I mean, one of my friends on the production who works with Anna Winger, who's the showrunner, she was actually dragged in to be an extra in a lot of the series. And she'd send me pictures of the outfit shoot. She was one of the Brooklyn extras, and it just looked like the 1980s, like everything. Every photo she sent me, I'm like, you could be in, what was that film? Working Girl with Melanie with the big shoulder pads.
Yeah, the big shoulder pads and the
really. But yeah, so that's the point of that music was. But there's another really key aspect to that scene in terms of music, which was you're really accurate in kind of perceiving that it's about tension and about this heavy weight of like being watched. And it's in a way we used it as well as a bit of I guess a thematic leitmotif for Esti we use that music whenever she's in a situation where her inner voice is telling her this isn't what I want in life. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it makes you feel that she knows somehow that she's not on her right path yet. But then there's a point where when she walks away from them in the supermarket and she finally decides, she does this kind of pirouette and turns around and decides, okay, if I'm going to have to do this, I'm going to do it. I'm going to walk. And she, in that moment, she finds this sort of dignity to sort of face these women who walk past them with poise and elegance and just doesn't look at them because she's been told not to, the whole thing, and does it beautifully. And so there's a turning point, and we talked quite a lot when we were working on this scene where that had to happen exactly, where the music goes from being really super sort of not dark tense, but kind of slightly dark tense.
Yeah.
Suddenly the tension is released somewhat when she turns around and there's these strings come in and it's almost like you get a feeling that she's starting to realize that she's got some inner strength that she can use. So we wanted to support that with the music.
Yeah. I guess one of the last cues I wanted to ask is about the very end, at the Brandenburg gate. What did you want to leave us with musically with that? I mean, it's after she walks away from Yankee and, you know, she's by herself, she's walking through that sort of that place. Can you sort of talk about what you wanted to like leave the audience with in terms of musically?
Right. That's again, it's another variation of Esti's theme. So her theme is in there again, which was a no-brainer for action anyway, because it's really kind of her combination of we hear her theme in so many different ways, like in the earlier that I mentioned in the taxi, where it's all about her being petrified of this new world, all the way to this liberating moment at the end. And one thing that was really important for that scene in terms of what to do musically was, so we had Anna Winger and Alexa Karolinsky are the two show creators, and Anna was the showrunner and Alexa took point more with music. So she was kind of helping direct me, and I worked with Sabina, who was our show, music supervisor. We had a lot of talks about that scene. And one thing I didn't know was, well, I think I knew it, but not really in great detail, was that there's a historical aspect to that walk as well. It's not just, they didn't just choose a location for no, just because it looked good. Hitler actually when he first came to power, led his followers through the Brandenburg Gate. It's a very important historical moment in German history. And because of that, there was another, that's one thing about this show that's important, is that there are quite a few layers of meaning to it, because we didn't want that scene to just be about, how do I put this? You know, if we made it too small, that it was just about her liberation as a woman, sure, okay, that says something, but it's ignoring this bigger context, because she's not just, it's not just girl power, you know, it's not just I'm smash the patriarchy. It's way more than that. You know what I mean? She's realizing her life in that moment, like herself as a person. She's going to have a baby, so she wants to be, you know, she wants to continue her community. That's important to her as well, but she just can't live in that world. And that historical context is really important, because when audiences who know that history see that, especially Jewish people, you know, they know about this history. They wrote that in there as a way of almost like she's reclaiming that walk, you know. And so the music had to be dignified. Couldn't be too joyous. It couldn't be too. And also, just from a purely dramaturgical point of view, that scene where her and Esti and Yankee have their moment in the hotel is so. It's one of the best scenes I've seen in terms of acting. And so you really had to come into it with a light touch music. Because you would just, there would have been a tragedy to turn that into melodrama, you know, so we left it alone and came in very softly, and that sort of set up a kind of dignified tone for it. You know, because earlier on there was discussion of even using a licensed song, you know, for that ending scene, but none of that would have just bulldozed over the historical.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm done.
I think that's something that the show does so beautifully, is that it is a story about this one young woman, but we are reminded of how big a lot of the themes are. Like whenever she is at the doctor's office and she won't even think about, you know, terminating the pregnancy, because she says, you know, we're trying to you know, work towards the lost. So it feels like, you know, it's sort of twofold. Like it is a very intimate story. It's very beautifully acted and so intimate, but it has these huge ideas.
That's a great scene that you brought up as well, because that one is another great example of the historical layers. Because if you remember that scene, it's actually intercut between her at the first time with the ultrasound, the first time she ever hears the baby's heartbeat, so it becomes a real thing for her. But it's intercut with Moser and Yankee when Moser takes him to the cemetery in Berlin. So it's literally life and death, you know, birth and death. And it's at the point where Moser is trying to snap Yankee out of his little small boy-minded depression and say, look, the world is bigger than you just losing a girl, you know, you're part of a bigger story, trying to remind him of the importance of what they as a people believe and who they belong to. And at the same time, Esti herself, okay, it's about her baby, but it's also about her realizing, oh, I'm now, the baton is being passed to me, you know, to carry on. And she does feel that's why it would have been wrong to make flippant choices musically. And in fact, for that moment when she first hears the heartbeat, I brought in the same theme that I use whenever, you'll notice it probably most from when she calls her grandmother crying.
Oh yeah, oh God.
Yeah, that same music comes back at the heartbeat. And in that context, you hear that sadness again, but again, it's like a link to her grandmother. It's like it reminds you, maybe you don't notice it when you're watching, but these are the sorts of things that help audiences feel, you know, you like a story, you're not sure why you liked it so much more than you thought you would have. And these things help, you know, you felt that really intense connection with her grandmother when that music was there. And then you hear it again when she's, you know, in this moment of joy, but also sadness that she's alone, she's a baby. and it brings a link to her family. You know, reminds you of her mother. She's thinking of her grandmother. You know what I mean? So that's yeah, it was really well spotted that you noticed that. Yeah.
Well, I actually, I think that's all I have for you for now. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I just think the whole thing, it's just an exquisitely made, it's so beautiful, and I love your music. Like I watched the whole show, and then I went back and just listened to the score from like beginning to end, and it's just it's so good. Like I kept thinking of certain moments as I was listening to it. So I just think your work on this is really, really great. So thank you
so much. Thank you. All right.
Well, I hope you stay safe and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, I like your shirt, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I figured it's, Gay Pride Month. It's super gay.
So. Oh, yeah, it is too, of course.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a good day, Antonio. And yeah.
You're welcome.
And the award circuit this year. It's so good.
Good luck with your move.
No, thank you.
Yeah.